I don't think he had any great regrets about Blue Peter's decision. It was understood why it was not working out.
You can't blame people for saying yes to a great job. And if it doesn't work out, it's as much your fault because you made the wrong choice or you didn't produce them in the right way or whatever. It's not all on that person.
I don't think for 1 minute when Michael was told that he ever thought he wouldn't come out the other end of it.
I do remember the shock at realising it, being told it was HIV.
Janet told me that he had phoned her and had said, do you want the good news or the bad news?
Yeah, he was certainly like that. He really did try to bring humour into the situation.
A long time ago, in a land very far from the northeast of England, there lived a writer named Lyman Frank Baum. Better known simply as L. Frank Baum, the author, born in Chittenango in the state of New York, penned a great number of novels. By far the best known of those today are his children's classic, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and the further 13 books set in the marvellous land of Oz, which followed. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was published in 1900, and its story was immortalised on the cinema screen in the classic 1939 Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer motion picture, The Wizard of Oz. In 1985, a sequel of sorts was released, though Disney's Return to Oz was more a realisation of Baum's Oz novels than a direct continuation of the earlier movie. Characters like the hesitant Jack Pumpkinhead and the villainous Gnome King were made believable by hook or by crook, with all the ingenuity of every branch of motion picture special effects employed. TikTok, the one-man robotic army of Oz, was no exception. Shaped like a large brass ball with stumpy legs set wide apart, no viewer watching could have imagined it possible that there was a human operator inside making him walk. But an operator there was, a golden-haired boy named Michael Sundin. Michael was the Gateshead lad who went to Oz, and this is his story.
Half of me is sad about this work and adventure holiday coming to an end, as I've done so much and seen so much more of the world in such a small amount of time, and being paid for it as well. But there's the other half of my mind that says it's time to come home, to my own house, my own bed, and my own cat. I miss Cleo a great deal, and I just hope she is well and remembers me. But most of all, I miss all my friends and relatives. You all seem to be cut off from me, as we're on other sides of the world.
When Michael went away to Australia and Japan, he was away all them months with Starlight Express. When he came back, we actually met in Covent Garden. I'll always remember that meeting because he ran towards me with a koala bear in his hand. And he said, and he used to call me Lola. Didn't call me Lorraine, he used to call me Lola. And he said, look Lola, look what I found you in Australia.
So Michael had experience with Andrew Lloyd Webber Productions already, so it was a comfortable fit for him. He even knew people in the London performance. I saw the London performance with a friend of his in it, so it was an amazing show to see, and it was on a sort of race track, so they weren't just on a stage, but they were racing around continuously, and Michael could skate, and he turned into a brilliant skater. He had the inline blades way before they became fashionable, so he was a good skater, and that role was probably his last big role on stage.
You went to Osaka in Japan. I remember actually waving Michael off on the train. He was going on this big adventure, but of course he did really well.
When I met Michael, there was no sense of bitterness about what had happened to him. That was post leaving Blue Peter, and that's what I meant about he had an amazing open personality. He was positive, and he got on with his life. And I think, given that he'd been this amazing sportsman, and then went into presenting, I think that that for him was kind of a bonus.
He never ever said to me he'd regretted. I think he was, to be quite honest, I think he was more hurt by the way he was treated, because he was treated badly.
He didn't seem to me to be someone who bore grudges. You know, nobody talked about him being bitter or angry. I think he was able to, and that's a huge tribute, not only to him, but to his family, because he must have been brought up in a kind of quite a grounded way. Maybe he had enough self-confidence to know that he had worth and value.
So that was quite sad, because he was doing particularly well, and that could have been a really great springboard to other things. Having said that, that didn't stop Michael. It could have stopped many one, and he might have returned back to the northeast. He was never going to do that. That was not going to be something that would stand in Michael's way. And I think that's testament to sort of his tenacious sort of personality, that he went on to do other things as well. Probably in an area where he would have more influence, where he was given the platform to add to the role and ad-lib. That would have been, yes, very Michael.
And so he got on with his life and kept reinventing himself. I was in EastEnders at the time, so it would have been about 1986, 87. And Pat Phoenix died. Pat was one of the big stars of Coronation Street. And they decided at the Palace Theatre Manchester to have a huge benefit to celebrate Pat. And so I went up there with Leslie Grantham, who was also starring in EastEnders. And we went up to kind of represent the EastEnders cast and join with others, like the Coronation Street cast and many, many others. And Michael was actually in the tribute to Pat Phoenix, because he was in a show that was on tour, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. And that was when I met him during rehearsals for that Sunday evening benefit, and then later during the show. And I struck up a friendship with him immediately.
I used to work in a delicatessen in Leeds, and Michael was in Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and Michael came in for some shopping because he was staying near me, and that's how I first met Michael. I was going to see the show that night, and I asked him if he was from the show, because I could tell that he was a dancer and an actor by the way he held himself. Well, from there, I went to see Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and after a particular show, I went round to the stage door and met Michael, and we chatted, and Michael remembered me from the shop, and I said it'd be nice if you kept in contact, and I did. I wrote to Michael, and Michael returned my letter, and we became firm friends from then on and did an awful lot of things together. On my 27th birthday, Michael took me to the Ritz for afternoon tea, and he had my hair done in the John Frieda salon. Me and Michael went to see a lot of theatre productions together that I probably wouldn't have seen had it not been for Michael. We went to see Hello Hello, and afterwards Michael took me into the back of the Palladium, which the dressing rooms are just what you imagine them to be. And he took me to meet Gordon Kay. We spent a lot of time in Covent Garden. We liked it there.
When he was up in Newcastle doing the touring show of Seven Brides, myself and a friend had gone along to see it, and we met him after the show, went out for a very nice Italian meal somewhere in Newcastle. And it was really a bit like carrying on a conversation that we'd finished maybe 10, 15 years previously. Just managed to carry on from then.
I've been to Liverpool for the day for a screen test. Now, don't laugh, but it is to be a health and fitness expert for a daily programme called This Morning, which is on ITV from 10:30am till midday, Monday to Friday. It would be a weekly spot doing articles on health and fitness and also regular exercises. A bit like a male Mad Lizzie.
And I used to stay at his flat quite a lot with him. On his hall walls were photographs of people that he'd done things with. Like there were some photographs of part of a video he'd done with Samantha Fox. He was in the Bonnie Tyler Total Eclipse of the Heart. There were photographs of that, and there were some photographs of, he did the Rick Astley video.
I've been doing bits and pieces, a video for an educational Red Cross charity, 2 commercials, one for Cars for Germany, and the other for Paston's Lamb, where I play the chef. Also, I did the new Rick Astley video, where I played one of his mates, so watch out for that, maybe on Top of the Pops in the next few weeks.
At the time, there was a lot of fear and panic about the whole AIDS situation.
In the last year of Michael's life, Michael was taken ill, I think September-ish, something like that. And I think he knew what was going on. And one of his visits up to the northeast, he asked if he and I could go for a long walk together, which we did. I was still living at home at the time, close to where Michael's family home was. We went for a long walk and we talked about all sorts of things. He was telling me about his life in London, his career, how it was going. And he approached a subject in which he was talking about HIV and AIDS. And he said, you know, I'm a bit nervous. I'm a bit afraid that I might have it. And my reaction to that was to say, oh, don't worry. I said, I'm sure you'll be fine. You just need to go along and get a test and it'll be okay. So you don't need to worry, you'll be fine. And Michael said, no, I do think I might be at risk. And I could really kick myself, because now, with hindsight, I can see Michael was trying to tell me. He couldn't quite bring himself to find the words to say to me, I'm positive. I could really kick myself, because now, with hindsight, I can see Michael was trying to tell me. He couldn't quite bring himself to find the words to say to me, I'm positive. And unfortunately, I wasn't perceptive enough to pick that up.
And Michael would cope with anything, but I think this was a lot more at first than he probably could cope with.
Poor Michael, I really feel so sad that I wasn't able to take on board what he was telling me and to help him at that point. And it wasn't until a few months later that he told me outright that he was HIV positive and that his health was failing. Perhaps it was the idea that, you know, the indestructible Michael, the athlete, the health freak, could possibly be vulnerable to this, and I just couldn't see it. And I feel awful the fact that he was reaching out to me and I didn't get it.
He asked me to meet him at Paddington St Mary's, and I did. And it was actually one of the nurses that filled me in a lot more about it, because then I don't think Michael mentally was able to deal with everything. He told me some of it, and one of the nurses explained the rest, and she said that I could come up and take him out for days, which I did.
I went to visit Michael in London. He was really not well at all. He was visiting Newcastle at one stage and he'd lost quite a bit of weight, and I think it was around that time that he disclosed to me exactly what illness he had.
He knew he was ill, but he didn't know how serious it was, so it was just a gradual understanding of what was going on and how serious he was. I do remember the shock at realising it, being told it was HIV, and it was understood how dangerous HIV was in the early 80s. So it was a big shock, but you didn't know how long, what the disease would look like. So it was really unknown rather than knowing, you know, a certain length of time it's going to happen. And also the distance was tough as well, because until the end he was in the Lighthouse, London, and St Mary's. So we did visit him, but the distance did make it tougher. But he did have a lot of friends in London that rallied round as well.
I went up one Easter and we went into the centre of London and said he wanted to take me somewhere. We went into Thornton's chocolate shop and he came out with an absolutely huge chocolate egg, and it had my name on it, Lorraine, not Lola, Lorraine. And he said to me when he gave me it, he said, "Where do you tell your friends that you go when you go to the hospital?" And I said, "I tell them I go to the hospital, why?" And he said, "Do you tell them why?" And I said, "I tell them I go see someone who's not well, who's HIV and needs my help." And he said, "Are you all right about it?" And I said, "I'm fine, fine. If people want to know, I'll tell them. I'm not ashamed, and you shouldn't be ashamed." And I don't think he was ashamed, but he was shocked because I wasn't bothered. Michael was my friend, and he'd still remain my friend. And as long as you did what you were told and took care when you did things, you're fine. And that's the way it was. I didn't lie to anybody. My mum and dad knew. My brothers know. So I wouldn't have ever lied. Because it's someone ill like any other illness. And that I always told Michael that, and he knew that.
We learnt more of his base of friends in that period than before, you know, because we got more contact with them and they were supporting him. So there was some positives out of that period as well as the sadness.
I think Michael thought that I might not tell people, that I might say, "Oh, I'm going to someone who's got a chest infection, or they've got cancer," or because the first time Michael rung me from Paddington St Mary's, he said, I'm going to get well again, and if this doesn't affect my career, I want to learn how to ice skate. And he wanted to learn to ice skate. I don't think for 1 minute when Michael was told that he ever thought he wouldn't come out the other end of it. I do know it hit him hard, and I do know he was in shock for a while, because I do know at some point he wrote on little cards that he was HIV, and he put it on people's tables in, like, he organised a little get-together, and he wrote on little cards to announce that he had it, because he didn't know how to do it. And I think had he not been in shock, he wouldn't probably have done it that way. But I was in London and I saw the shock, and he was shocked and obviously hurt because of his career. And that's the way he told some people, which was quite sad really, because I don't think he knew how else to tell some people.
The conversation's been brought into the mainstream quite recently with It's a Sin on TV a couple of years ago, but what was the mainstream view of AIDS and its victims at that time?
But it's difficult to understate. It's difficult to understate now, looking back, the extent to which AIDS was a stigma. I mean, I was the generation growing up, I was young at that time, and you'd go to the cinema and there'd be these adverts that basically told you that AIDS was death, and that, you know, any one false move and, you know, you were going to be doomed. And there was an awful lot of focus on it being a gay plague. There was also an awful lot of judgment that gay people had brought it upon themselves because of their promiscuous lifestyles. And, you know, those were the prevalent views. So there wasn't a lot of empathy, concern, compassion going on.
There was it was seen as a way to isolate us, to disregard us, to dehumanize us. It was as if they were saying, you see, we told you all along they were a threat.
Police officers were given gloves to handle gay men in particular upon arresting them. So, you know, that was there from the beginning. And it gradually got worse because you had Section 28 behind this under the Thatcher government. So therefore talk of issues around homosexuality made it harder for people who were doubly stigmatised with an HIV status as well. So to be able to give safe sex messages in schools, for example, come with the compromise. I think also we're living in an era where people living with HIV and people living with AIDS were treated as an other. So there's instances of hospital beds where nurses were wearing hazmat suits or had police crime scene tape around the beds themselves. So there's whole examples of how people were treated, put in different wings, different cutlery used. You can imagine that kind of isolation and containment that goes with it. So HIV stigma was very overt. It was very rife, and when the media did publish stories about it, you were either as innocent or guilty. So you were guilty of infecting another person, namely gay men, or you were an innocent receptor of that, for example, born with that, or you had had that via blood transfusion because you were haemophiliac.
Someone I know who wasn't HIV positive, but he was known to be gay, he had his windows bricked. His door was daubed. They were trying to force him out, and that wasn't uncommon. It was, as I said earlier, it was a dark, dark period to be gay, lesbian, gay, bisexual, or trans, and AIDS gave them the excuse to attack, vilify, and dehumanize us.
The 1970s were viewed as an absolute decade of liberation after the Stonewall riots. So people felt a lot more liberated, a lot more open cultures and pubs and community centres and all sorts appearing. The HIV epidemic worked on two levels, I think. It set things back in that it made people equate sex with death, and that terrified people. On the other side, I think it also reinvigorated the gay community. It led to organisations like ACT UP. It led to organisations reevaluating what the priorities were. The comfort days or the halcyon days of the 70s in many ways were then replaced with a much more edgier reality. And I think that reinvigorated the LGBT rights movement as a whole.
There was also a huge degree of ignorance about the transmission of AIDS, and also the fact that at that point it was pretty much a death sentence if you had a diagnosis. So for men who received that diagnosis, if they had no idea how long they would have. Some people lived for years with it. Some people were dead within weeks. So, you know, for somebody like Michael, what do? Do you just kind of shut the curtains and stay in bed? I'm sure some people did do that. But I think he had phenomenal bravery because he continued to work. He continued to be optimistic as far as he could. I mean, you know, it's extraordinary. One of the things that It's a Sin showcased, it was the kind of amazing humanity of some of the people involved and the bravery of some of the people involved. And I think that I thought about Michael all the way through It's a Sin because, you know, everything I'd heard about how he dealt with his diagnosis was that he did his best to be as up-tempo, he did his best to remain healthy, and he worked really until very shortly before he died, and worked, you know, at a high level of success.
Yeah, he played it down. I think that was part of the reason why people were so shocked, because he played it down and put on a brave face and didn't want to upset people, didn't want them to worry. So his sense of humour came out, you know, even in those days. So it was a tough time, but he didn't want us to be too down by it. And yeah, he was really brave.
There was a story in your book about the way that he broke the news to Janet Ellis, which I think speaks volumes about, probably says a lot about how sort of what a brave and just what a sense of humour he had as well.
Janet told me that he had phoned her and had said, "Do you want the good news or the bad news?" And so she said, oh, well, I'll have the good news. And he said, well, the good news is I still love chocolate. And she said, okay, what's the bad news? And he said, the bad news is that I've got AIDS. And that's quite a way of breaking that piece of news.
I didn't know that, but I can hear Michael saying it. I can imagine that he would do that, trying to make the best out of a challenging situation always.
I think he was making it easier for her. It's extraordinary. This often happens in these situations, that people who are dealing with it, it doesn't have to be HIV or AIDS, people with cancer diagnosis, people in those sort of really, kind of, this is it, you're facing your mortality now. They make it easier for the people around them if they can. And Michael certainly fell into that category.
Yeah, he was certainly like that. We've seen that in letters, that he really did try to bring humour into the situation and to be positive at all times.
I didn't learn about it until very late, and it was one of really utter disbelief. We were losing so many people. Age didn't even factor into it. Once you got the HIV virus, it was a death sentence. You also faced the most appalling stigma and discrimination. Again, I blame the press. Stories that if you shook hands with a gay person, you could catch it. If you drank from a glass that they'd drunk, you could catch it, that you could catch AIDS. And so a lot of people, friends of mine, when they became HIV positive, some stuck there, out there, partying with us in the clubs, in the bars, as they faded away. And others chose to shut themselves away and deal with facing the unknown. So when it became known that Michael was HIV positive, it was a huge shock. And again, in someone so young and so vivacious, so full of life, we lost so many.
The last time I saw Michael, we travelled up from London to Newcastle on the train. And this was after he had been told he was HIV positive. He did talk to me about it and about how he was coping with being HIV positive.
And then one day he said, I need to pick something up from my flat. So we went to his flat and we ended up carrying one of the big old-fashioned TVs up and down on the underground to get it to the hospital, because he didn't have a TV in his room. And we walked in the hospital with the TV and the nurses just started laughing. And she said, how have you got that here? And I said, he wouldn't get a taxi. I said, we had to go on the underground with this TV. And everybody just fell about laughing. And I think that was Michael's way of dealing with it.
And at that time, treatment and therapy were in their infancies. I think AZT was about the only drug that was available, which had very little effect. It had horrendous side effects. And poor Michael had a very, very tough time. And his health continued to decline.
He did eventually come home, particularly devastating for me because we were really close. Although I didn't get to go and see him a lot in London, we were still close in terms of contact and communication. And if Michael did come to the area, we'd go out for the day, I would take him out in the car, we'd go for lunch and so on. And it was obviously, he was becoming quite poorly. And even though we knew what was probably going to happen, it still doesn't make it easy when it does actually happen.
And I saw him 6 weeks before he passed away. And poor Michael was hardly recognisable. He was wasted, lost a lot of weight, moving slowly and stiffly and uncomfortably with a stick and having all kinds of problems. And it was 6 weeks after that that I got a call from Michael's family to say that he was very, very ill. He was being brought back to Newcastle to be with his family, which he did, and a couple of days later he passed away. And I attended Michael's funeral, which I'll always remember.
I wasn't actually in the country when Michael passed away, which made it really incredibly difficult for me. I was returning from a flight abroad from Greece, and there was a newspaper article in the airport that had described what had happened, and my husband had to quickly retrieve the newspaper so that I didn't see that article until I got home. And then I found out when I got home what had actually happened. I was absolutely devastated. You know, I'd lost not only a really close cousin, but a very, very close friend for me.
The star sign study seems right in many ways. I'm sensitive, although I have a very strong willpower, and I can easily make up my mind, and I will fight for my right. I am quite stubborn at times, and I'm very optimistic, and I suppose I'm unselfish, lovable, devoted, and eager to please. It's quite true.
Michael, being a good Catholic, was buried in Saltwell Cemetery and had to have the most stylish headstone in the entire cemetery. But that was just typical of Michael. Afterwards, there was a more positive event. Michael's family arranged a celebration service, and of course, because most of Michael's friends were in London, that's where it was to be. And we had a lovely service of celebration, a memorial, if you will, in St Paul's the Actors' Church, not to be confused with St Paul's Cathedral. And I was honoured to be invited to go down there and to give a eulogy for Michael. A number of other people were there, some of his friends, some celebrities. Janet Ellis and Simon Groom were there. Bobby Crush played a medley on the piano. Paul Gambaccini, the radio DJ, was there, and a few other famous people as well. And after such a sad event, it was nice to go there and find the positive elements and to celebrate what was an amazing life, even if it was too short.
It's really hard to think about what life was like in the past, when now we have phones and we can do everything on our phones and we can get all of this information. And so, yeah, you do lose touch with people. But I remember meeting up with people from the trampoline club when we were going to Michael's funeral, and it's like there was never a time when you weren't together.
Yeah.
Because you just know those people so well, even though maybe 10 years have passed. It doesn't matter that 10 years have passed, because you're the same person. Yeah, you've had different experiences in the time, but you're the same person. And they're the same people, and you're just like back with your family.
Earlier this year, it was arranged, and somebody from one of the other clubs was coming up, and there was a get together of it was about 20 people, just from all trampoline, and Michael would have been right in the middle of that as well if he'd been here.
One of Michael's school friends, who didn't want to appear but did want to contribute, sent us these words. He said he squeezed a whole life into his 28 years, performed at the highest level in his chosen sport, and carried that ability and drive into the many things he did after that. I'm 62 now, as he would have been. I've done some canny stuff, but if he was still here, he'd have crammed more in than most of us have ever done. Of course, when someone passes, we do like to comfort ourselves that hopefully they were able to see their life in the same way that we do. In Michael's case, he did in fact have the time to recognise at the end that even though he had had a short life, he'd had a very full one.
Did a lot in that short life, and he realised that towards the end. He said as much, that he packed a lot into his life, so it gave him some comfort in knowing that he was dying.
Yeah, that's good. That is nice to know. It's nice for me to know that as well.
He did have a fantastic life, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
I just feel that times have changed now, and had Michael been born at a different time, maybe the outcome would have been so different. Just born at the wrong time.
It made my life so different. I wouldn't have been what I was had it not been for Michael saying, yes, you can do it.
I live in Docklands, and there's an HIV charity called Positive East, and occasionally they display sections of the quilt from the AIDS quilt. And I turned up, and there it was all over this big building, inside the building. And there was a wonderful piece of the quilt in memory of Michael. And I thought of that young face, those bright, bright, shining eyes, and all that he'd gone through. And he's left a memory. He's left a memory of someone who was brave and got on with life.
One bad experience, it would have made Michael a stronger person if had he lived. It was dying so young. He would have done lots and lots of good things in his life because that's all he was capable of doing. Suddenly I got the phone call saying that Michael had died. I couldn't believe it because he looked fine on the train, and he must have gone into decline very rapidly.
The 80s were particularly severe and cruel for those in those circumstances. Before the 80s and probably now, it would have been such a different outcome. And that's what's very sad for me. Michael could still be here today.
There's something in terms of him representing a generation, because of the nature of how high profile his sort of rise to fame and then what happened afterwards. You'd have a very hard heart not to respond to that, even if you didn't factor in the fact that he, on top of that, lost his life to a virus, which, as we now know, it's you don't want to get the virus, but if you do, you can live, a normal life, and you can, live for years and years and years and years. And that wasn't at that point something that anybody was really focused on.
And I will remember him as a treasure, someone to look at and think, yeah, look, a wonderful sportsman, and he's one of us. He's gay. We're as good as the rest of them, and the rest of them are as good as us.
Sometimes I wonder and I imagine what Michael might have done with his life had he not passed away in his late 20s. And that's a tantalising question. Would he have remained on the stage? Would he have become a household name? I really can't tell, but it's amazing just to think of his talent and the potential and the strength of character that he had. Whatever it is, I think he will have achieved something very great. And I think we would all have been very much aware of him.
I often wonder what he would be up to. I think obviously his physical ability wouldn't be as strong, but I think it would have led him into that type of go anywhere and do anything type of career that you can sustain. I mean, I'm still quite physical. The grounding that our sports gave us from our teens has kept me interested in sport and keep on going into my 50s, about to hit 60. So I think he would have been the same. He would have not relented. That hyperactivity turns into a want of action and movement, and I think he would have been doing that. It may have kept in his career, I don't know, or he may have settled down to quieter roles, but he would have done the action man role as long as he could. And I just seeing things like Strictly dancing, I think he would have been banned from doing that even in his 60s because he would have been too good.
He'd be choreographing something. He would
be a judge on Strictly, wouldn't he?
He would be a great judge on Strictly.
Yeah, he'd be fabulous.
I think of things like Cirque du Soleil as not necessarily the performer, but the choreographer, the designer of what them shows would be, using his experiences of what he'd done through life to be able to build that performance for other people to then do.
if you're that age and you have all that stuff ahead of you, and for years it had all been an upward spiral, even with the Blue Peter blip, I'm sure if he had kept his health, carried on working, he'd be working now, he'd be propping up on Graham Norton and probably being very funny about the Blue Peter experience and saying, you know, okay, maybe it wasn't a great fit, but, you know, it is what it is. And
you know, you can just imagine him coming onto a Graham Norton type show and just having a laugh with everybody, and everybody would have been in fits.
Yeah.
An absolute fits, I'm convinced.
I couldn't imagine him ever being a plumber or a brickie.
I think he would have reinvented himself every 7 or 8 years, which is how you survive in this business. I think he would have had a long career. I think he may have had a career as an actor. He may have had a career as a writer. I mean, he was a really intelligent young man, and whatever he would have turned his hand to, he would have made a great success of it. I wish he was still alive now. I mean, I think he would have had a very golden and interesting career.
I think he certainly would have gone on either as a presenter or as an actor. He was at home with an audience. He loved it, and that's what he did. He was a showman. You know, a sports person is a show person. He certainly he did what he did well, which was he delivered.
He was a very talented guy, a very, very talented guy. I mean, with all of the sports background that he had, and you could turn his hand to, I think, quite a few things. So I think he would have gone on to bigger and better things.
Yeah.
Not that what he was doing wasn't big and good already, but he would have just carried on going. The energy would have just kept growing, and I'm sure as he got more and more well known, he could have become an ever-present face. You see some characters turn up on TV that they just get involved with more and more stuff. I could have seen that happening with Michael.
I think he would have been at the top of his tree, really, to be honest, because he had that personality, he had everything going for him, and I really think he would have been a big name, both in film, TV, and whatever he'd set his mind to. I think he would have been able to accomplish.
And I think it was that performance thing that got him through, you know. It was that performance that he could put himself into anything. I mean, when he got himself inside that costume, I mean, how could anybody have stayed in there for very long? Except he did.
Yeah.
It was
because that's what was needed.
Yeah.
You know, but that's what he was. He was that kind of person that it didn't matter what he'd done, he committed.
But separate to Michael's professional life, Michael was very kind, very caring, and extremely generous. So I think separate to his personal career, I think he would possibly have been advocates for his own charities. I think he would have been a huge support to others in similar circumstances to himself, because he was a very giving person. So I think he would have been successful on both fronts.
If he were with us today, he'd be doing one of two things. He'd either be presenting the news, something like Channel 4, chatty, lively, or I think he'd have his own chat show. And within it, he'd probably bring on lots of musical items, because he was a man who loved life. And short though his life was, life loved Michael.
I think he'd probably be still in theatre. I think he was fantastic in theatre. He might even be working behind the scenes, because whatever he turned his hand at, Michael could do. So whatever came along, he'd do. And he was kind, and I would be still in touch with him. I'd never have let that friendship go. He would still be doing what he wanted to do. And if it was travelling, he'd have done it. Nothing stopped Michael. He'd done some absolutely fantastic things, absolutely marvellous things that other people in a full lifetime of being here till they're 80 wouldn't have done.
I mean, nobody could have packed more into a short life than Michael did, and the things he did were achievements greater than most of us will ever manage. And it was the most amazing life, and I'm so grateful, so privileged that I knew Michael. You know, Michael enriched my life. I still think about him all these decades later. My life is better for having known my dear friend Michael Sundin. Think about him to this day.
Yeah, I often wonder what he would have been doing right now. I think it would have been something positive and something unusual for an old man.
So if Michael was here now, we'd probably get up and have a dance.
Yeah, you would. And I'd be sat watching you.
You know how we watch Strictly now, and you see, and it looks marvellous. He would make me look marvellous. He really would. I didn't know what I was doing. He would just push me in all directions and everything, and he would just make me look marvellous. I'm forever grateful for that. I would love to dance with him again.
Was R2-D2 one of the things he did at one time?
No, he was in Return to Oz.
He was inside a little robot. I think he was a robot.
Tick-tock or whatever it was, or tic-tac or something, I don't know.
In the 1985 motion picture Return to Oz, the story's hero, Dorothy Gale, returned to the marvellous land of Oz to find it in ruin. The villainous Mombi and her malevolent master, the Gnome King, had conspired to turn the people of Oz to stone. They were frozen, trapped in a moment of time. By the movie's end, the heroes had done what heroes do, and by their efforts, the people of Oz had been restored. Michael's story was frozen in a moment of time, a dark time for him and for many others like him. It's a story that has not been revisited enough. And though real life cannot be expected to deliver the happy endings we expect of fiction, we hope that, through the words and the memories of his friends and his family, we have, however briefly, restored Michael Sundin as he was. We hope we have done him justice.